Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about yet another continuity problem in Star Trek Discovery. And I think the overall idea of season 3 was actually good, it could have worked. First of all, they fixed one of the biggest problems of the show being a prequel, because they constantly showed that the technology level apparently was much more advanced than it was in all the other shows, and yet it was set before most of the other shows. So that constantly annoyed me, and so by jumping to the future, they kind of fixed this problem, but they created another similar problem, which is because they jumped so far away after all the other shows, then now technology should be much more advanced. And yet it wasn't, maybe except for a few small things like programmable matter and slightly better transporters, but for the most part technology seemed to be the same as it was earlier in the show in the previous seasons. And also it doesn't fit what we saw in a few episodes from the other shows which were set in the far future, or people from the far future coming back, and they apparently were much more advanced than anything we see in this season. So I still would say it's still a continuity mistake, now from the other end of the timeline. Because everything in this future of the 32nd century should have been much more advanced than what we saw. And I'll give you maybe the most prominent example is the holograms, the fact that we see holographic people who are glitchy, and if you blink at them really fast you might confuse them and you might shut them down and stuff like that. And that was probably the stupidest moment in the whole season in my opinion, and it completely contradicts everything we know from the other Star Trek shows. And also in this whole galaxy which is supposed to have billions of stars and all of that, and yet everyone seems to be on the same technological level roughly, and so it's not the way it was earlier in Star Trek. In all the Star Trek shows we always saw such a huge variety of different civilizations on different levels. Some planets might be really primitive and other planets might be super advanced beyond our imagination even. There were much older civilizations which were more advanced and so on. And yet in Star Trek Discovery they apparently forgot about that, and suddenly everyone in the galaxy are roughly on the same level of technology. And it's kind of like in Star Wars, in the Star Wars galaxy we have so many different aliens and yet technology seems to be almost identical. And it doesn't really make sense if you think of how big the galaxy is and all of that. And so in the Star Trek universe it was always far more diverse in terms of technology, and yet it's now being treated as if it's the Star Wars galaxy, and so everyone seems to be roughly on the same level. And it was never explained in the show what happened with all the more advanced aliens and all of that, and so that annoys me a little bit. And especially since they are trying to make the story so epic and big, like it's about the whole galaxy, all of the galaxy lost the ability to travel at warp and all of that. If they didn't say it's the whole galaxy, if they made it like a local problem, then I can be okay with that. I can say maybe this local area of space lost contact with the other parts of the galaxy and we don't know what's going on in the other parts. That would have solved this issue. But no, they keep having to say it's the whole galaxy, and also they confuse galaxy with universe sometimes. I don't think they know the difference, these writers. And it was a problem even in the early seasons of the show, and they seem to be jumping all over the galaxy even without the sport jump. Apparently even the normal warp drive can get you anywhere in the galaxy. And in the mirror universe they said that the Terran Empire controls the entire galaxy. And even in this season they had a scene again set in that mirror universe in the past during season 1, and they showed the Discovery jumping at warp without any sport jump. It jumped in normal warp and reached another planet, I think it was Ryza, in a few seconds. So apparently travel around the galaxy is almost instantaneous even with normal warp travel, and so that really annoys me that they don't have any kind of sense of scale, just like they don't have any sense of scale regarding the inside of the ship, because that whole thing with the turbolifts, that apparently there's some kind of giant void inside the Discovery where all the turbolifts are flying, even though that looked bigger than the entire ship looks like from the outside. And so the same kind of lack of attention to detail exist regarding the whole galaxy. So they don't know how far places are from each other, and they constantly contradict each other. Like one time they said we cannot get from that sector to Earth without the sport jump, and yet that guy who stayed in that sector somehow did get there later on. That guy who waited 40 years and they just forgot about him and left him there. Somehow he did find his way back later without explanation, without the Discoverer's help apparently. And in some episodes they said that they cannot contact distant planets because all the subspace relays went down, and yet in other episodes later they can easily contact anyone from the other side of the galaxy. They kept talking with the Admiral in a live communication hologram when they were on the other side of the galaxy without any problem. So the show seems to contradict themselves constantly because they simply don't pay attention to the details. And so this video is not defending the show. Obviously, you just heard my criticism, so I do blame the show writers for not paying attention to all of this, but I'm still going to try to offer theories to explain all of this because I think the theories that I'm going to suggest are interesting, and I wish the show would have done that and explain all these things in a logical way, and that way we can accept this scenario that they showed us of the entire galaxy being ruined and space travel being almost impossible or much harder than before. And I said before, I have no problem with this idea by itself. I think actually it might be a good plot for one season if they fix it in the end, which apparently they did. That might be a nice kind of shaking things up and maybe kind of rebooting things and restarting things in a new way. So I'm not necessarily against doing that if they made it believable. And so one of the things that really annoyed me most of all is the fact that technology level seems to be much less advanced than it was implied it would be in this kind of jump to the future, meaning we had a lot of episodes in the older shows of people showing up from the 26th century or 27th century or 29th century, and each of those episodes, the technology they seem to have was much more advanced than anything we have in now in this show in the 32nd century. So for example, the holographic doctor's mobile emitter which they got in Voyager was from one of those episodes of someone from the future, and they got that technology. And so how come they don't have this kind of technology now in the 32nd century? How come Gray is worried that no one will see her again because she temporarily became a hologram and she wants to stay a hologram? So how come she doesn't know that mobile emitters exist, that they can do the same thing on Discovery later? And I could have forgiven the Discovery crew not knowing that, but remember that Adira and Gray are both from this time period. They did not come from the past like Discovery. They lived in this time period, and they are a Trill, and so they should have the memories of all the previous hosts, including a Starfleet Admiral, so they should be aware of all the most modern technology. And so how come none of them heard about the mobile emitter, and so what the hell is the problem? And so stuff like that really annoyed me because characters who are from this time period don't know even technology that we saw in the much older Star Trek shows from a much earlier century. And so it doesn't really make sense. And the thing with the hologram really pissed me off more than anything. The fact that you can blink really fast and confuse them and then they will disappear and shut down, that was absolutely terrible in every way, and I really cannot defend that. But at least they did have the programmable matter, which is basically like, almost like the T-1000 or like the replicators from Stargate SG-1, all kinds of little blocks that can form into different shapes, and you can make things with them and they can do things. And so I don't mind that. I think that's fine, but it's not really anything original. We saw that kind of thing in a lot of other science fiction movies, and the way it's been used often doesn't make any sense. For example, the view screens seem to be made from this material, and this way it can form the shapes of people that they talk to on the view screen so that they will be three-dimensional. But why would anyone need that if they have holograms in this time? And the holograms can look perfectly like a real image, and you can even touch the holograms of this time period. And so why the hell would you need this programmable matter to form shapes of people coming from view screens when you have holograms? And even before the holograms, even in TNG, they had the 3D view screens, meaning that everything looks totally realistic, like a 3D image, and it's not like a flat view screen. We saw that in a lot of episodes, that when you see everything from the side, the person inside the view screen also appears to be from the side, and so it appears to be a fully realistic looking 3D image. And also they had, even from TNG time, they had holograms that you can touch and that can appear to be totally realistic person that you cannot even tell it's a hologram. So if you have that, why the hell would you need those tiny blocks to form someone's face from the view screen? It makes no sense, and it looks worse than what I mentioned. So that's one example of the way it was used, making no sense. And even, they showed that the desk can form from that material and all of that, which also doesn't really make sense. It did kind of look cool, but it doesn't make sense if they have holograms everywhere. Then a hologram can appear in an instant. Then why would you need the programmable matter? I guess maybe to save energy. That would be the only way I can explain that. Maybe programmable matter doesn't require as much energy as a force field of a hologram, and so maybe that's why they prefer to use it. And this is one of the excuses I'm going to offer in this video. I'm going to say that maybe some of the technology got severely limited because of this disaster that happened, that most of the dilithium got destroyed in the galaxy. And dilithium apparently had some kind of subspace component. It was an exotic material. It's the thing that made a lot of these technologies possible. Things like not just the warp travel, but even subspace communication apparently was also dependent on dilithium. Maybe even replicators, maybe other technologies which were very energy expensive, and so maybe without the lithium they cannot generate as much power as easily as before, and so that's why they moved to different kinds of technologies. So maybe their holographic emitters are less advanced because they want to save energy. Maybe that's why they prefer to use these view screens with the programmable matter to still have a 3D image without the holographics. But if that is the explanation, that means that in the next season, if there will be one, they shouldn't have this limitation anymore because they discovered a giant source of new dilithium in the end of season 3, and so that means in season 4 they shouldn't have any of these problems and they should have a much more advanced technology now. Now, another problem is that apparently no one is aware of advanced AI existing or potentially existing. They even seemed surprised when a Discover crew told Starfleet about the fact that they had to fight and defeat Control, but they never heard about Control AI and all of that, and they seemed surprised by the sphere data inside of Discovery, and yet at the same time were not worried about it, which doesn't really make sense. Why didn't they analyze it? Why didn't they study it? So no one seemed to care, and no one was even surprised about the spore drive itself. No one seemed to be in a hurry to study it and to replicate it. And some of these things could have been explained away as a banned technology, meaning if they established that it was simply so dangerous that it had to be artificially limited, that could have explained it. So they could have said that, at some point in the past we had to limit AI technology because of the dangers of that, or the morality ramifications of that, or whatever. So they could have established that it was a technology that used to be much more advanced, which they deliberately restricted to avoid all those problems. That would have been fine as well, just as they did with time travel. That's exactly the excuse they used about time travel being banned. They said that because there was that temporal war, everyone were fighting each other using time travel, and after that war was over, they imposed a total ban on all time travel in the galaxy, which is an interesting idea, but also it wasn't really properly explained, because I keep wondering how exactly are they making sure no one else in the galaxy uses it. If they don't use it themselves, if they don't have any kind of technology to monitor it, how they would know if someone else is using it? Or even someone from the past who still had the technology before it was banned, how can you prevent someone from the past to still use it in the future? And so it makes little sense, and they never really explained it. And also there are so many natural phenomenons in space itself that can cause it accidentally. We saw that as well in all the other shows, that there are so many temporal anomalies all across space that you can accidentally cross into some other time frame by accident. And so just by banning it, just by saying it's illegal, wouldn't prevent all of those accidental time travels using natural phenomenons. How can you ban a natural phenomenon from existing? So it doesn't make sense unless there's some kind of temporal police which can detect any such instance and can send agents there to prevent it or whatever. So I wish they would have explained that much better. At least it explains why they don't even consider using time travel, either to find out what happened or to fix what happened. So at least it explained that little logical problem in some way. And also I kind of like the idea of the temporal wars being a huge war and not just a temporal cold war like it was described in Enterprise. But if at some point it became an all-out temporal war, maybe that's actually the best way to explain away all the continuity problems. We can simply say all of this show is happening in a new timeline which is different to the ones we saw in the other shows because of this temporal war, which could have changed all the history of all the species and all the galaxy. And this is a theory I made a few videos about, and I said that's actually the best way to explain away all continuity mistakes at once. Simply say that this whole show is taking place in a new and different timeline, and you can say it was because of all the temporal war, because it can be used to explain that. Maybe some temporal soldier went back and eliminated all the species which later became much more advanced, which is why they don't exist anymore in this galaxy. And maybe some people gave advanced technology to the past, and maybe some technologies never got developed while others did get developed, and so that's why we have this different kind of mix of technologies, that some seem much more advanced than before while others seem less advanced. And so the holograms are now less advanced, and yet warp travel is apparently more advanced. It's much faster now than it ever was before. But still, you would think if it's all set in the same universe with the same kind of rules, you would still end up with similar technology eventually, meaning maybe it will take you longer or faster, to discover certain technologies, but everyone should discover them eventually. And this whole idea of the spore network is something that annoys me also most of all, because it makes no sense. How come no one else in the entire galaxy ever discovered it again, except for Stamens? Stamens, who is one human from the 23rd century, is the only one who ever invented it in the whole galaxy. It makes no sense, and that's why they should have explained it of this being a banned technology. Or maybe if those entities in the sport dimension somehow blocked it from being used, something like that could have been fine, but they never explained this, and so that still annoys me till this day. It annoyed me from the first season of the show, and even till now, because it was never explained. How come no one else in the whole galaxy ever discovered this again? And there was one line toward the end of this season when that scientist in the wheelchair said that discovery must have come from the golden age of technology. And so that is an interesting line, which seems to indicate that it was the peak of the technological and scientific progress of humanity, and that they never really evolved beyond that, and even became less advanced when they went to the future, which at least acknowledges this kind of problem which I keep mentioning. So at least that line acknowledged it, but it never really explained it. And so that's, I think, what was missing in this season, that there was not really any kind of logical explanation for these kind of things. How come technology didn't advance as much as it should have, especially if we consider the other Star Trek shows as part of the same timeline, same continuity? Then where are all those amazing things that should exist right now and yet don't? So we can use the different timeline excuse, we can use the temporal wars to explain it, but I think there should have been a much more interesting explanation, which would have been like a story of its own, and that is that maybe humanity itself became kind of stagnated, and simply it became harder and harder to invent new technology. And I think that actually would make sense, and especially if you live in an utopia, which they kind of destroyed, and so I guess it wouldn't make sense in this context. But if you think about it, if the Federation was a true utopia in which there were no material needs anymore and everyone were happy and there are no big problems to solve, and so you can simply live in a paradise, then that kind of would explain why most people would lack the motivation to bust their ass and to study some scientific field their entire lives and study it so deeply that they will make progress in it. I think there would be very few such people. I think most people would be content since society is so perfect and science is so advanced anyway, and everyone are so happy anyway, and you don't have to work in anything, you can live for free, there is no money anymore, you have everything you would ever need. Maybe people had their own holodecks in their homes and whatever. So most people, I would think, wouldn't really bust their ass studying science and the hard things. Only some really clever people who really enjoy that study itself, they would do it, but most of the population wouldn't really be doing that, and especially you wouldn't stay in the same exact field, which might get really boring. So imagine, even today I think that's a problem, because every single scientific field is so big right now, even in our century, that you have to spend your whole lifetime to become an expert only in that specific field, and only then maybe you will get some progress done. You might discover something new or progress the science in that specific field, but you would have to spend at least decades of your life just in that one specific field. And so I don't think there would be a lot of people capable of it mentally. And so we can say maybe AI got restricted, and so that would also be a problem if AI is not allowed to do any of that, and it all depends on flesh and blood humans, and the lifespans maybe have their limitations. Despite all the advanced medical technology, maybe people wouldn't live longer than, let's say, 200 years, and you wouldn't want to spend your whole life studying just one specific scientific field. You would get bored by it, you would want to do other things with your life, and so very few people would actually stay in their specific field enough to be able to even understand everything that came before, and enough to make new progress. I think it would be very hard to do it. So I actually think it would make sense for science and technology to begin to stagnate after a certain limit, simply because it's so advanced already. So for a new person who gets born in this future society, he would first have to become an expert in everything that came before in that specific field, at least, to even be able to understand the technology or science that already exists, and only then begin to make any kind of progress. That would mean only 100 plus year old scientists would even begin to make any kind of progress in anything. And so I think it would make sense that technology would stagnate after a certain point and wouldn't really advance as quickly And we can add to this all these psychological problems of why would people even want to do this, because they can just live in a paradise, they can live inside of a holodeck all their life, they can have whatever they want and live as kings, and no one would even bother to invest their energy into so much work that would be required to make progress. And so only a few rare people would want to do it. And so I would think that also would have an effect, that most of humanity probably would be lazy and not hardworking and not having the motivation to do anything. And so I think that actually would have made an interesting science fiction story by itself. We actually had an episode like that in TNG, when they found that planet Aldea, which had a very advanced technology, and yet the people living on that planet became dumb because they were completely reliant on their computer managing their whole planet, that they forgot all the science themselves, meaning the computer is the only one who knew everything. It was running the whole planet, giving them anything they needed. And I guess if the computer broke down, they wouldn't even know how to fix it, but it wasn't even the case. The computer was working fine, but it couldn't solve the problem that the planet was facing, that they were losing their ozone or something, and the computer, I guess, was not advanced enough to offer a solution, and the people themselves didn't know what to do, they didn't know any science, they didn't learn any math, they basically became totally lazy, they were only into art and enjoyment and stuff like that. And so obviously their culture and their civilization became stagnated. So I think it would have been a very interesting story to show that maybe the same kind of thing happened to humanity, or to most of humanity, and because of that they cannot fix the problems they are facing, and because of that maybe having the visitors from the past, from a time period in which people were still being creative and curious and hardworking, maybe would have helped them. And so I wish they would have done something like that, which would have been like a nice commentary on humanity and kind of warning us about the dangers of becoming too complacent and how everything might stagnate because of it. And so I wish they would have done something like that, at least in one episode. Maybe that episode when they visited Earth, they could have showed that maybe the people of Earth became kind of spoiled and lazy and not curious anymore and not hardworking anymore, and that could have been a nice commentary on humanity and a nice warning to humanity. And maybe it would take a disaster to kind of shake them out of it, of that apathy, and back to becoming productive and creative and imaginative. So I wish they would have done that kind of story to at least in part explain why technology apparently stagnated in the far future. I think it would have been much more interesting and maybe even funny. They could have done a comedic episode with that kind of idea, and it could have been a lot of fun, and it would have been kind of an educational message for the viewer to tell people, don't become like that, don't become lazy and spoiled and all of that, because in the end it will hurt you. In the end you will not fulfill your own life, your own potential, your own curiosity, and in the end you might regret it. Even if you had a lot of fun just being a spoiled brat, you still will regret it later on when you don't have anything to show for it. So that's the idea that I wish this season would have had, at least in one episode, to play around a little with that idea. That could have been so good, and yet they didn't do it. Even in Deep Space Nine, I think there was an episode on Ryza when there was some guy who came to disrupt the vacation, and he was talking about how the Federation became spoiled and all of that. So the same kind of ideas, but he was kind of like the villain of the episode, so no one took him seriously. But I think it could have been interesting to actually show such a thing happening in the farther away future, that maybe at least some of humanity became like that, just like that guy predicted, because they became so spoiled and all of that. So I think it could have been such a nice little story. It didn't have to be the full season, but at least one episode about one planet in the Federation, or maybe even Earth itself, becoming like that, I think would have made sense. It would have been realistic. It would have explained some of the problems in the galaxy and why technology didn't progress. And it might have shown why the Discovery crew was so essential for all of this, that no one else was searching for the answers. Only Discovery is still from an age when people were still curious and still hardworking and still before they got spoiled, basically. I think that could have been a nice way to tie all of this together much better. So that's my idea. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss this in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit the like button, please subscribe, click the notification bell if you want to see updates of new videos, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.